Excerpt from On the Road, the original scroll by Jack Kerouac. During 3 weeks in 1951, Jack Kerouac wrote the first draft of On the Road, typed as a long single-spaced paragraph on 8 sheets of tracing paper, which he taped together to form a scroll, representing the identifiable point at which his vision and narrative voice first came together in a sustained burst of creative energy. The scroll is the uncut version of Kerouac's masterpiece, rougher, wilder, and more sexually explicit than the edited work that appeared in 1957 on this day. On the Road, the original scroll, is Kerouac's signature achievement and one of the most significant, celebrated, and provocative documents in American literary history. Here, in the original scroll, Kerouac uses real names that he later redacted and changed because his publishers were afraid of lawsuit. Neal Cassady, his friend and muse and companion for much of this novel, or novelized memoir, I suppose you can call it, is not Dean Moriarty. He's Neal Cassady. Ginsberg is Ginsberg. William Burroughs is William Burroughs. We hear the real names, the real places, the real skinny, as we used to say in the old days. Okay, and now I begin without further ado. Camerado, I give you my hand. I give you my love more precious than money. I give you myself before preaching or law. Will you give me yourself? Will you come travel with me? Shall we stick to each other as long as we live? Walt Whitman. I first met Neal not long after my father died. I had just gotten over a serious illness that I won't bother to talk about, except that it really had something to do with my father's death and my awful feeling that everything was dead. With the coming of Neal, there really began for me that part of my life that you could call my life, on the road. Prior to that, I'd always dreamed of going west, seeing the country, always vaguely planning and never specifically taking off and so on. Neal is the perfect guy for the road, because he actually was born on the road. When his parents were passing through Salt Lake City in 1926 in a jalopy on their way to Los Angeles, first reports of Neal came to me through Hal Chase, who showed me a few letters from him, written in a Colorado reform school. I was tremendously interested in these letters because they so naively and sweetly asked for Hal to teach him all about Nietzsche and all the wonderful intellectual things that Hal was so justly famous for. At one point, Allen Ginsberg and I talked about these letters and wondered if we would ever meet the strange Neal Cassady. This is all far back, when Neal was not the way he is today, when he was a young jail kid shrouded in mystery. Then, news came that Neal was out of reform school and was coming to New York for the first time. Also, there was talk that he had just married a 16-year-old girl called Luann. One day I was hanging around the Columbia campus and Hal and Ed White told me Neal had just arrived and was living in a guy called Bob Malkin's cold water pad in East Harlem, the Spanish Harlem. Neal had arrived the night before, the first time in New York, with his beautiful little sharp chick, Luann. They got off the Greyhound bus at 50th Street and cut around the corner looking for a place to eat and went right into Hector's. And since then, Hector's cafeteria has always been a big symbol of New York for Neal. They spent money on beautiful, big, glazed cakes and cream puffs. All this time, Neil was telling Luann things like, "Now, darling, here we are in New York, and although I haven't quite told you everything that I was thinking when we crossed Missouri, especially at the point when we passed the Boonville Reformatory, which reminded me of my jail problem, it is absolutely necessary now to postpone all those leftover things concerning our personal love of things and at once begin thinking of specific work-life plans," and so on, in the way that he had in his early days. I went to the cold water flat with the boys, and Neil came to the door in his shorts. Luann was jumping off quickly from the bed. Apparently, he was fucking with her. He always was doing so. This other guy who owned the place, Bob Malkin, was there, but Neil had apparently dispatched him to the kitchen, probably to make coffee while he proceeded with his love problems. For to him, sex was the one and only holy and important thing in life, although he had to sweat and curse to make a living and so on. My first impression of Neil was of a young Gene Autry, trim, thin-hipped, blue eyes, with a real Oklahoma accent. In fact, he'd just been working on a ranch, Ed Yule's in Sterling, Colorado, before marrying Elle and coming east. Luann was a pretty sweet little thing, but awfully dumb, and capable of doing horrible things, as she proved a while later. I only mention this first meeting of Neil because of what he did that night. We all drank beer, and I got drunk and blah-blahed somewhat, slept on the other couch, and in the morning, while we sat around dumbly smoking butts from ashtrays in the gray light of a gloomy day, Neil got up nervously, paced around thinking, and decided the thing to do was have Luann making breakfast and sweeping the floor. Then I went away. This was all I knew of Neil at the outset. During the following week, however, he confided in Hal Chase that he absolutely had to learn how to write from him. Hal said I was a writer, and he should come to me for advice. Meanwhile, Neil had gotten a job in a parking lot, had a fight with Luann in their Hoboken apartment. God knows why they went there, and she was so mad and so vindictive down deep that she reported him to the police, some false, trumped-up, hysterical, crazy charge. And Neil had to lamb from Hoboken. So he had no place to live. Neil came right out to Ozone Park, where I was living with my mother. And one night, while I was working on my book, or my painting, or whatever you want to call it, there was a knock on the door, and there was Neil, bowing, shuffling obsequiously in the dark of the hall and saying, "Hello, you remember me, Neil Cassidy? I've come to ask you to show me how to write." "And where's Luann?" I asked. And Neil said she'd apparently hoard a few dollars together or something of that nature and gone back to Denver. The whore. So we went out to have a few beers because we couldn't talk like we wanted to in front of my mother, who sat in the living room reading her paper. She took one look at Neil and decided from the very beginning that he was a madman. She never dreamed she'd too to be driving across the mad American night with him more than once. In the bar, I told Neil, "For Christ's sake, man, I know very well you didn't come to me only to want to become a writer, and after all, what do I really know about it except that you've got to stick to it with the energy of a Benny addict?" And he said, "Yes, of course, I know exactly what you mean, and in fact, those problems have occurred to me, but the thing that I want is the realization of those factors that one should depend on Schopenhauer's dichotomy for any inwardly realized," and on in that way. Things I understood not a bit, and he himself didn't. And what I mean is, in those days, he really didn't know what he was talking about. That is to say, he was a young jail kid, all hung up on the wonderful possibilities of becoming a real intellectual, And he liked to talk in the tone and using the words, but in a jumbled way that he had heard real intellectuals talk. Although, mind you, he wasn't so naive as that in all other things. And it took him just a few months with Leon Levinsky to become completely in there with all the terms and the jargon and the style of intellectuality. Nonetheless, I loved him for his madness, and we got drunk together in the Linden bar behind my house, and I agreed that he could stay at my house till he found a job. And we furthermore agreed to go out west sometime. That was the winter of 1947. Shortly after meeting Neil, I began writing or painting my huge town and city. And I was about 4 chapters on when one night, when Neil ate supper at my house, and he already had a new parking lot job in New York, the Hotel New Yorker lot on 34th Street, he leaned over my shoulder as I typed rapidly away and said, "Come on, man. Those girls won't wait. Make it fast." And I said, "Hold on. Just a minute. I'll be right with you as soon as I finish this chapter." And it was one of the best chapters in the whole book. Then I dressed, and off we flew to New York to meet some girls. As you know, to go from Ozone Park to New York takes an hour by elevated and subway. And as we rode in the L over the rooftops of Brooklyn, we leaned on each other with fingers, waving and yelled and talked excitedly. And I was beginning to get the bug, like Neil. In all, what Neil was, simply, was tremendously excited with life. And though he was a con man, he was only conning because he wanted so much to live, and also to get involved with people that would otherwise pay no attention to him. He was conning me, so-called, and I knew it, and he knew I knew. This has been the basis of our relation, but I didn't care, and we got along fine. I began to learn from him as much as he probably learned from me. As far as my work was concerned, he said, "Go ahead, everything you do is great." We went to New York. I forget what the situation was. 2 girls. There were no girls there. They were supposed to meet him or some such thing, and they weren't there. We went to his parking lot where he had a few things to do. Change his clothes in the shack and back and spruce up a bit. In front of a cracked shack mirror and so on. And then we took off. And that was the night Neil met Leon Levinsky. A tremendous thing happened when Neil met Leon Levinsky. I mean, of course, Allen Ginsberg. 2 keen minds that they are. They took to each other at the drop of a hat. 2 piercing eyes glanced into 2 piercing eyes. The holy con man and the great, sorrowful, poetic con man that is Allen Ginsberg. From that moment on, I saw very little of Neil, and I was a little sorry, too. Their energies met head on. I was a lout compared. I couldn't keep up with them. The whole mad swirl of everything that was to come then began, which would mix up all my friends and all I had left of my family in a big dust cloud over the American night. They talked of Burroughs, Hunky, Vicky. Burroughs in Texas, Hunky on Rikers Island, Vicky hung up with Norman Schnall at the time, and Neil told Allen of people in the West like Jim Holmes, the hunchbacked pool hall rotation chart, and card player, and queer saint. He told him of Bill Thompson, Al Hinkle, his boyhood buddies, his street buddies. They rushed down the street together, digging everything in the early way they had, which has later now become so much sadder and perceptive. But then they danced down the street like dingle-doties, and I shambled after as usual, as I've been doing all my life, after people that interest me. Because the only people that interest me are the mad ones. The ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, desirous of everything at the same time. The The ones that never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, 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 like Roman candles across the night. Alan was queer in those days, experimenting with himself to the hilt, and Neil saw that. And a former boyhood hustler himself, in the Denver night, and wanting dearly to learn how to write poetry like Alan, the first thing you know, he was attacking Alan with a great amorous soul such as only a con man can have. I was in the same room. I heard them across the darkness, and I mused and said to myself, now something started, but I don't want anything to do with it. So I didn't see them for about 2 weeks, during which time they cemented their relationship to mad proportions. Then came the great time of traveling spring, and everybody in the scattered gang was getting ready to take one trip or another. I was busily at work on my novel, and when I came to the halfway mark, after a trip down south with my mother to visit my sister, I got ready to travel west for the very first time. Neil had already left. Alan and I saw him off at the 34th Street Greyhound station. Upstairs they have a place where you can make pictures for a quarter. Alan took off his glasses and looked sinister. Neil made a profile shot and looked coyly around. I took a straight picture that made me look, as Lucen said, like a 30-year-old Italian who'd kill anybody who said anything against his mother. This picture, Al and Neil neatly cut down the middle with a razor and saved a half each in their wallets. I saw those halves later on. Neil was wearing a real Western business suit for his big trip back to Denver. He'd finished his first fling in New York. I say fling, but he only worked like a dog in parking lots. The most fantastic parking lot attendant in the world. He can back a car 40 miles an hour into a tight squeeze and stop on a dime at the brick wall and jump out, snake his way out of close fenders, leap into another car, circle at 50 miles an hour in a narrow space, shift and back again into a tight spot with a few inches each side, and come to a bouncing stop the same moment he's jamming in the emergency brake. Then run clear to the ticket shack like a track star, hand a ticket, leap into a newly arrived car before the owner is hardly out, leap literally under him as he steps out, start the car with the door flapping, and roar off to the next available parking spot, working like that without pause 8 hours a night. Evening rush hours and after theater rush hours and greasy wino pants with a frayed fur-lined jacket and beat shoes that flap. Now he'd bought a new suit to go back home in, blue with pencil stripes, vest and all, with a watch and watch chain, and a portable typewriter with which he was going to start writing in a Denver rooming house as soon as he got a job there. We had a farewell meal of franks and beans in a 7th Avenue Rikers. And then Neil got on the bus that said Chicago on it and roared off into the night. I promised myself to go the same way when spring really bloomed and opened up the land. There went our Wrangler. And this was really the way my whole road experience began. And the things that were to come are too fantastic not to tell. I've only spoken of Neil in a preliminary way because I didn't know any more than this about him then. His relation with Alan I'm not in on, and as it turned out later, Neil got tired of that, specifically of queerness, and reverted to his natural ways, but that's no matter. In the month of July, 1947, having finished a good half of my novel, and having saved about $50 from old veteran benefits, I got ready to go to the West Coast. My friend Henry Crew had written me a letter from San Francisco, saying I should come out there and ship out with him on a round-the-world liner. He swore he could get me into the engine room. I wrote back and said I'd be satisfied with any old freighter so long as I could take a few long Pacific trips and come back with enough money to support myself in my mother's house while I finished my book. He said he had a shack in Marin City, and I would have all the time in the world to write there, while we went through the rigmarole of getting the ship. He was living with a girl called Diane. He said she was a marvelous cook, and everything would jump. Henry was an old prep school friend, a Frenchman brought up in Paris and France, and a really mad guy. I never knew how mad, and so mad at this time. So, in 10 days, I wrote and confirmed this, in innocence of how much I'd get involved on the road. My mother was all in accord with my trip to the West. She said it would do me good. I'd been working so hard all winter, and staying in too much. She even didn't say too much when I told her I'd have to hitchhike some. Ordinarily, it frightened her. She thought this would do me good. All she wanted was for me to come back in one piece. So, leaving my big half-manuscript sitting on top of my desk and folding back my comfortable home sheets for the last time, one morning I left with my canvas bag, in which a few fundamental things were packed, left a note to my mother, who was at work, and took off for the Pacific Ocean like a veritable Ishmael, with $50 in my pocket. What a hang-up I got into at once. As I look back on it, it's incredible that I could have been so damn dumb. I'd been poring over maps of the U.S. and Ozone Park for months, even reading books about the pioneers and savoring names like Platt and Cimarron and so on. And on the road map was one long red line called Route 6 that led from the tip of Cape Cod clear to Ely, Nevada, and there dipped down to Los Angeles. I'll just stay on 6 all the way up to Ely, I said to myself, and confidently started. To get to 6, I had to go up to Bear Mountain, New York, filled with dreams of what I'd do in Chicago and Denver, and then finally in San Fran. I took the 7th Avenue subway to the end of the line at 242nd Street, right near Horace Mann, the prep school where I had actually met Henri Crew, who I was going to see. And there, took a trolley into Yonkers. Downtown Yonkers, I transferred on an outgoing trolley and went to the city limits on the east bank of the Hudson River. If you drop a rose in the Hudson River at its mysterious mouth up near Saratoga, think of all the places it journeys by as it goes out to sea forever. Think of that wonderful Hudson Valley. I started hitching up the thing. 5 scattered shot rides took me to the desired Bear Mountain Bridge, where Route 6 arched in from New England. I had visions of it. I never dreamed it would look like it did. In the first place, it began to rain in torrents when I was left off there. It was mountainous. 6 came from the wilderness, wound around a traffic circle, after crossing the bridge, that is, and disappeared again into the wilderness. Not only was there no traffic, but the rain came down in buckets, and I had no shelter. I had to run under some pines to take cover. This did no good. I began crying and swearing and socking myself on the head for being such a damn fool. I was 40 miles north of New York. All the way up, I'd been worried about the fact that on this, my big opening day, I was only moving north instead of the desired, the so longed for, west. Now, I was stuck on my northernmost hang-up. I ran a quarter mile to an abandoned, cute English-style filling station and stood under the dripping eaves. High up over my head, the great hairy Bear Mountain sent down thunderclaps that put the fear of God in me. All I could see were smoky trees and dismal wilderness rising to the skies. What the hell am I doing up here? I cursed. I cried for Chicago. Even now, they're all having a big time. They're doing things. I'm not there. When will I get there? And so on. Finally, a car stopped at the empty filling station. The man and two women in it wanted to study a map. I stepped right up and gestured in the rain. They consulted. I looked like a maniac, of course, with my hair all wet, my shoes sopping. My shoes, damn fool that I am, were Mexican guarachis that, as a fellow later said to me in Wyoming, would certainly grow something if you planted them. Plant-like sieves not fit for the rainy night of America. And the whole raw road night. But they let me in and rode me back to Newburgh, which I accepted as a better alternative than being trapped in the Bear Mountain wilderness all night. Besides, said the man, there's no traffic passes through 6. If you want to go to Chicago, you do better going across the Holland Tunnel in New York and head for Pittsburgh. And I knew he was right. It was my dream that screwed up, the stupid hearthside idea that it would be wonderful to follow one great red line across America instead of trying various roads and routes. That's my tragic Route 6. More to come of it, too. In Newburgh, it had stopped raining. I walked down the river, and among all things, I had to ride back to New York in a bus with a delegation of school teachers coming back from a weekend in the mountains. Chatter, chatter, blah, blah, and me swearing for all the time and the money I'd wasted, and telling myself I wanted to go west, and here I've been all day and into the night going up and down, north and south, like something that can't get started. And I swore I'd be in Chicago tomorrow, and made sure of that, taking a bus to Chicago, spending most of my money, and didn't give a damn, just as long as I'd be in that damn Chicago tomorrow. The bus left at 2 o'clock in the morning from the 34th Street bus station 16 hours after I'd more or less passed it on my way up to Route 6. Sheepishly, my foolish ass was carried west, but at least I was headed there at last. I won't describe my trip to Chicago. It was an ordinary bus trip with crying babies and sometimes hot sun and country folk getting on at one pen town after another, and so on. Till we got to the plain of Ohio and really rolled, up by Ashtabula and straight across Indiana in the night for Chicago. I arrived in Chicago quite early in the morning, got a room in the Y, and went to bed with a very few dollars in my pocket as a consequence of my foolishness. I dug Chicago after a good day's sleep. The wind from Lake Michigan, the beans, bop at the Loop, long walks along South Holstead and North Clark, and one long walk after midnight into the jungles where a cruising car followed me as a suspicious character. At this time, 1947, bop was going like mad all over America. But it hadn't developed to what it is now. The fellows at the Loop blew, but with a tired air, because bop was somewhere between its Charlie Parker ornithology period and another period that really began with Miles Davis. And as I sat there, listening to the sound of the night, which it has come to represent for all of us, I thought of all my friends from one end of the country to the other, and how they were really all in the same vast backyard, doing something so frantic and rushing about beneath. And for the first time in my life, the following afternoon, I went into the West. It was a warm, beautiful day for hitchhiking. To get out of the impossible complexities of Chicago traffic, I took a bus to Joliet, Illinois, went by the Joliet Pen, and stationed myself just outside town. After a walk through its leaf-rickety streets behind, pointed my way, all the way from New York to Joliet, by bus in actuality, and I had about $20 left. My first ride was a dynamite truck with a red flag, about 30 miles into the great green Illinois. The truck driver pointing out the place where Route 6, that we were on, intersected Route 66, before they both shot west for incredible distances. Along about 3 in the afternoon, after an apple pie and ice cream in a roadside stand, a woman stopped for me in a little coupe. I had a twinge of hard-on joy as I ran after the car, but she was a middle-aged woman, actually the mother of sons my age, and wanted somebody to help her drive to Iowa. I was all for it. Iowa, not so far from Denver, and once I got to Denver, I could relax. She drove the first few hours, at one point, insisted on visiting an old church somewhere, like as if we were tourists. Then I took over the wheel, and though I'm not much of a driver, drove clear through the rest of Illinois to Davenport, Iowa, via Rock Island. And here, for the first time in my life, I saw my beloved Mississippi River, dry in the summer haze, low water, with its big, rank smell that smells like the raw body of America itself, because it washes it up. Rock Island, railroad tracks, shacks, small downtown section, and over the bridge to Davenport, same kind of town, all smelling of sawdust in the warm Midwest sun. Here, the lady had to go on to her Iowa hometown by another route, and I got out. The sun was going down. I walked after a few cold beers to the edge of town, and it was a long walk. All the men were driving home from work, wearing railroad hats, baseball hats, all kinds of hats, just like after work in any town, anywhere. One of them gave me a ride up the hill and left me at a lonely crossroads on the edge of the prairie. It was beautiful there. Across the street was a motel, the first of many motels I was to see in the West. The only cars that came by were farmer cars. They gave me suspicious looks. They clanked along, the cows were coming home, not a truck. A few cars zipped by. A hot rod kid came by with his scarf flying. The sun went all the way down, and I was standing in the purple darkness. Now I was scared. There weren't even any lights in the Iowa countryside. In a minute, nobody would be able to see me. Luckily, a man going back to Davenport gave me a lift downtown, but I was right where I started from. I went to sit in the bus station and think this over. I ate another apple pie and ice cream. That's practically all I ate, all the way across the country. I knew it was nutritious, and of course, it was delicious. I took a bus in downtown Davenport after spending a half hour watching a waitress in the bus station cafe, and rode to the city limits, but this time near the gas stations. Here the big trucks roared, wham! And inside 2 minutes, one of them cranked to a stop for me. I ran for it with my soul whooping. And what a driver! A great, big, tough truck driver with popping eyes and a hoarse, raspy voice, who just slammed and kicked at everything and got his rig underway and paid hardly any attention to me, so I could rest my tired soul a little. For one of the biggest troubles hitchhiking is having to talk to innumerable people, make them feel that they didn't make a mistake picking you up, even go so far as to entertain them almost. All of which is a great strain when you're going all the way and don't plan to sleep in hotels. The guy just yelled above the roar, and all I had to do was yell back, and we relaxed. And he bawled that thing clear to Rapid City, Iowa, and yelled me the funniest stories about how he got around the law in every town that had an unfair speed limit, reiterating over and over again, "Them goddamn cops can't put no flies on my ass." And he was wonderful. and he did a wonderful thing for me. Just as we rolled into Rapid City, he saw another truck coming behind us, and because he had to turn off at Rapid City, he blinked his taillights at the other guy and slowed down for me to jump out, which I did with my bag. And the other truck, acknowledging this exchange, stopped for me, and once again, in the twink of nothing, I was in another big, high cab, all set to go hundreds of miles across the night. And was I happy? And the new truck driver was just as crazy as the other one and yelled just as much, and all I had to do was lean back and relax my soul and roll on. Now, I could see Denver looming ahead of me like the promised land, way out there beneath the stars, across the prairie of Iowa and the plains of Nebraska. And I could see the greater vision of San Francisco beyond, like jewels in the night. He bawled the jack and told stories for a couple of hours. Then at Stewart, a town in Iowa, where years later, Neil and I were stopped for suspicion in what looked like a stolen Cadillac, he slept a few hours in the seat. I slept too, and took one little walk along the lonely brick walls, illuminated by one lamp, with the prairie brooding at the end of each little street, and the smell of corn like dew in the night. He woke up with a start at dawn. Off we roared, and an hour later the smoke of Des Moines appeared ahead, over the green cornfields. He had to eat his breakfast now, and he wanted to take it easy, so I went right on into Des Moines the rest of the way, about 4 miles, hitching a ride from 2 boys from the University of Iowa. And it was strange, sitting in their brand new comfortable car, and hear them talk of exams as we zoomed smoothly into town. Now, I wanted to sleep a whole day and go on until I reached Denver. So I went to the Y to get a room. They didn't have any. And my instinct wandered down to the railroad tracks, and there's a lot of them in Des Moines, and wound up in a gloomy old Plains Inn of a hotel down by the locomotive roundhouse, and spent a wonderful long day sleeping on a big, clean, hard white bed with dirty remarks carved in the wall beside my pillow, and the beet yellow window shades pulled over the smoky scene of the rail yards. I woke up as the sun was reddening, and that was the one distinct time in my life, the strangest moment of all, that I didn't know who I was. I was far away from home, haunted and tired with travel, in a cheap hotel room I'd never seen, hearing the hiss of steam outside, and the creak of the old wood of the hotel, and footsteps upstairs, and all the sad sounds. And I looked at the cracked high ceiling, and really didn't know who I was for about 15 strange seconds. I wasn't scared. I was just somebody else, some stranger, and my whole life was a haunted life. The life of a ghost. I was halfway across America, at the dividing line between the east of my youth and the west of my future. And maybe that's why it happened right there and then, that strange red afternoon.